Welcome to the bonus content, queens.
Welcome.
Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. So today we have a more philosophical episode, and this will be broken down into two parts because I am personally really interested in philosophy. It is it's a pastime of mine, just seeing how, words and meanings and semantics and arguments are constructed. And I have always been a fan of the logical fallacies. And I wanted to do a couple of episodes on how the logical fallacies are basically used to trick women into settling for less in dating, because that they are used an awful lot.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool subject. I'm really glad you're bringing this up. Also, I think philosophy is usually perceived as a male field. So I think it's extra cool, giving it a twist.
Yes. Especially when a lot of the male philosophers, they had like really, really dodgy and problematic views about women. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau basically said that women should be in the kitchen and that's it, was anti-women's education. So
oh, was he the one who said that?
yeah, it was him. Yeah, he wrote was it a whole book or something? But he wrote extensively about how women should basically just stay in the kitchen and shouldn't be in education.
A lot of the famous philosophers have very problematic lives, and it's intertwined, like their personal lives and their philosophy. But a lot of the times it is taught separately, like in a clean container. Yeah.
Indeed. So the purpose of this episode is to essentially see how the logical fallacies are constantly used against women, because essentially what a logical fallacy is, it's an argument that is based on very, very faulty reasoning. And as we go through the examples, you'll see what I mean in that a logical fallacy is used in place of actually arguing against the point that is being made. And that can happen for a number of reasons. So it could be that the person trying to argue against your point, they may not be able to articulate themselves very well. It could be intellectual laziness, and it can just be manipulation, especially when it comes to women in dating. I think that's the most common one, is people tend to resort to these logical fallacies out of manipulation and a way to silence women.
Yeah, I think a lot of things, just looking at some of the things that you presented as fallacies. I mean, a lot of the time, these fallacies, their tool to captivating the consciousness is that it's plucking on the strings of fear, the fear of being alone, for instance. And that because it has an effective way of triggering that fear, then indeed you can look away from how it doesn't hold water, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that once you're aware of the logical fallacies, you'll see them everywhere. It's not just in dating, but politicians use them a lot as well. And you just see them in every, day-to-day discourse. And one of my favorite pastimes is calling out when people have used a logical fallacy, because people don't know what it is. But when I explain what it is, they sort of think like, oh, okay, yeah, so my argument wasn't as sound as I thought, because it doesn't address the points of the argument made. It's talking about something else entirely.
I'm not going to lie, that sounds like a lot of fun to be able to do that and to prove somebody wrong with sound logic.
So, and especially when men love to say that they're the logical gender, but a lot of their arguments, as we'll go through when it comes to women in dating, they commit a lot of the logical fallacies here. A lot. So it's like, really? Okay, let's get into it. So the first one is called the false dilemma. And so it's black and white thinking. So what this logical fallacy essentially is that it presents two options as being the only option. And this applies to dating in the context of, let's say a woman says that she wants to date a man she's attracted to who earns good money. It will often be positioned as, oh, well, if you date an attractive guy, he's going to cheat on you. You should basically lower your standards and settle for somebody you don't find as attractive or somebody who doesn't make as much money. It presents two options as being the only options when actually, there are often a lot more options. So it is possible to find a guy you're attracted to who earns a lot of money and who treats you well, for example.
Absolutely. It sounds like it's based on scarcity mindset, this kind of argument. It can't allow for a reality where all these things exist. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I've always said this, how incels say Chad, if a guy's attractive, he's a Chad, he's almost definitely going to cheat on you. And it's in my experience, the least conventionally attractive men I've been around have often treated me the worst. I can't say I've been treated awfully by a man who was conventionally attractive. And again, it's just that sort of false dichotomy, then basically saying, well, if you want an attractive guy, he's going to cheat on you because he's got options. But also, it ignores the fact that less conventionally attractive men, broke men, unemployed men, they also cheat and treat women badly as well.
Absolutely. I mean, if incels are saying that, or men who are down on their luck with women, they're saying that to make themselves the more attractive option.
Yes, 100%.
They're basically saying, I will give you emotional security, whereas somebody who's more attractive than me will not. I mean, attractive people have their own problems. Some may be emotionally stunted.
Of course, of course.
I don't think it's like a direct correlation. Also, sometimes I call it the Tel Avivian hot guy syndrome.
Are there hot guys in Tel Aviv? Tell us more. Tell us more.
Of course there are, but that's like, it can be any major city, but basically it's a syndrome. I coined it. So yeah,
Explain what the syndrome is.
Okay, so it goes like this. Basically, guys who are super hot sometimes have like a block with life, in the sense of everything is going too easy for them. Like, it's really easy for them to get girls. Girls will come up to them, engage with them. They can treat them quite poorly and still get away with it. And then it kind of breaks their brain. I mean, they, like everybody else, but men, I think, more need to exert effort to get what they need. And then when that equation breaks, that equation that every human experiences, that like, oh, I need to exert effort to get things that I want, that equation breaks. And then these guys are kind of like untethered in life, walking around, like floating around through life, not knowing what they want, exclamation point. They never know what they want. And it's also unsatisfying for them. They actually do want somebody who is going to make them work hard. And a lot of the times that's the person that they're going to end up with. This is not to say like, if a person is treating you like that, then like if you meet a guy who's suffering from the Tel Avivian hot guy syndrome, it doesn't mean that you need to play hard to get him. Like, it's not going to help if he's not into you. But yeah, it was just like a little tiny bit of a story. I met with new friends last weekend, and like there was a really, really beautiful couple. Like, the girl looks like she's an angel sent from goth heaven. And the guy's also like a really attractive, kind of like a Labrador energy, like blonde hair, very, very cute, very funny. And yeah, I just had a conversation with him asking how they met. And he said they met through a dating app and they were talking for a while. And after like 2 weeks of, intense texting and very long messages, she was waiting for him to ask her out for a while. And finally, he was like, oh, well, if we meet, and she was like, I thought you'd never ask. So this guy was telling me about how, quote unquote, because he's Dutch, also kind of a fallacy that I disproved while we were talking, because he's Dutch, he's used to girls coming up to him, asking him out, making the moves. He never had to ask. And then I talked to him a little bit more about that, and turns out, like, through questions, it's not because he's Dutch. It's because he knows he's attractive, so he never had to do that. So at first he was saying, well, because I'm Dutch, we don't want to impose. I never want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. So if we're talking, I wouldn't want to ask her out, because then, maybe that's casting a shadow on the interaction and she will feel uncomfortable. But then, upon further inquisition, this person that he's talking to came up to him at a bar. So, it's pretty obvious that she's interested. But he had the privilege of being lazy. He doesn't need to ask girls out because he knows that he's good looking and he knows that they will ask him out. But you know what? His current wife, she wasn't playing that, because she was sitting on her pedestal and she knows that she's, not waiting, but she will not initiate the first date. She will let the man work hard for it. And you know what? She's the one he's married to.
That's such an interesting theory. Thank you so much for sharing that, Patricia. And I think it goes back to sort of saying, ultimately as well, this is an aside, but, when you see an attractive guy or a wealthy guy, just treat them like a guy. Like, don't put them on a pedestal just because they're more commercially attractive or, they've got more money, because that will actually make you stand out. Because a lot of women, either subconsciously or consciously, they put on almost like a show when they're in the presence of an attractive man or a wealthy man. And they're all used to that. I'm not saying you should be standoffish, but if you treat them just like another man, that will make you stand out.
Absolutely. And I would say even further, it has to do with your standards. Standards are not custom made per person. standards are your standards.
Well said.
If you know that you don't ask a guy on the first date, I mean, you can if you choose to. I, for my FDS values, believe that since men find it easier to acquiesce, they find it easier to go with the flow than women do. I would wait for a guy to show that he's interested and also for him to show effort.
Exactly. Because most guys, it's actually shocking. Like when I speak to my male acquaintances, like most guys will, especially if it's like sex, like casual sex, they will say yes to anything, even if they don't find the woman attractive, which is just wild to me.
Absolutely. I had a roommate that told me about a girl that he was dating that he was unattracted to. Unattracted to because, well, he's a big leftist, but she had body hair and he had an issue with that. Valid. He was not attracted to her, but he still dated her for a while because like the novelty kind of overpowered the ick. True story.
But what's wrong with having body hair on a woman? I mean, was he hair free?
It's not wrong. I don't judge him for it. It's a preference. But within that preference, just to say he was not attracted, but still he could, hit that. Sorry for the language, because for a time, the novelty overpowered the ick. It is true. Men's like a lower threshold of disgust is true. And just to wrap it all up, your standards, if for instance, that is your standard, which we as FDS support, that you ask, like you expect the guy to initiate the first date. And if he doesn't, there's just not going to be a first date. That standard doesn't change, depending on who you're talking to. That is your standard. That's it.
Very, very well said. So yeah, to wrap up this particular logical fallacy, the trap is it makes women believe that they have to lower their standards because if you go for the guy that you actually want, then you're going to suffer because he's going to treat you badly. Say no to that. That's not true. That is absolutely not true.
Yeah, or like that your standards are kind of like a fantasy or something like that. They're not valid, healthy standards.
It's almost like, do you know when, somebody asks on the internet or Reddit, like, how can people afford all these brand new cars and these holidays? And everybody instantly say, oh, they're in debt. They must be in debt. And it's like, that's not the only option. Some people just have more money. Like the phrase, like keeping up with the Joneses exists because some people are the Joneses. People just have more money than you. Of course, some people, finance these things through debt. But there are a lot of people who never go on holiday, who drive a 30-year-old car, who are also up to their neck in debt. Do you see what I mean? Like people do it all the time. And honestly, it's just cope. Some of it, it's just cope.
Yeah, I guess like in the example that you're giving, the person asking is like, why do I see every regular bloke going on vacation and I am not?
And of course, some people are genuinely up to their neck in debt and are living irresponsibly. But also some people just have more money than you, or they spend their money in different ways. They don't have kids, so they have the money to finance new cars and go on holiday, like every 3 months.
Yeah, I think this fallacy can also, I mean, of course, when we're talking about society trying to impose lower standards on women, we're talking both about men and women trying to impose those standards. And I think this is like a very usual example that we're giving about the woman who has compromised. She will also try to impose on you lower standards. So I think that's also where this false dichotomy can come into play, because this person, let's say, I'm just drawing a picture for the vividness, right? Let's say a person has settled down with a person that she's not actually that into, but he is stable. So when you talk to her and you tell her, well, I'm dating, but nobody's really interesting. I don't feel like people are like, let's say, intellectually stimulating for me. She could say, well, it's either or. You can either be with somebody who's stable, wants to settle down and have a family and will be there for you, or you can be with somebody who's stimulating for you, but he's not going to be safe, because that might showcase her experiences. Like the way that we perceive the world and what we say and think is so reliant on the information that we experienced. Like we're so limited in our ability to imagine or think of something that is foreign to us, really. So yeah, I think that's important to think about.
Absolutely. And I think it ties in nicely with I think we've spoken about this before, Patricia, but when we say that some women, they see other women's high standards as a judgment on their own choices because they know they've settled, and they will try to then get other women to lower their standards. And it's quite apparent because you don't see men policing down other men's standards in the same way. For example, if a man says, I want to date a supermodel, a man might say, well, get yourself to the gym and earn more money, but they'll never say, oh, well, you should essentially settle for a woman that you don't find as attractive because that's all you can get. Do you see what I mean? Like,
he's not going to tell him the truth, like, dude, look in the mirror.
well, no, they won't. And also, they might say you might need to change this about yourself, but they'll never basically tell them that you can't get what you want.
Yeah, men are quite good about being delusional. We should be more delusional too.
We should be more delusional, 100%.
Intentionally delusional.
Intentional delusion. Delulu is a salulu, as Diana rightfully says sometimes. And it's better than settling. So there's that. So the next one is the straw man fallacy. So the most poignant example I can give of this is the straw man fallacy is basically when you misrepresent an argument to make it easier to attack. So you change the content of the person's argument and what they're saying into something that makes sense to you so you can attack it. So basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to argue against the point that you never made. And I always call people out for this. I'll always say, like, you're actually arguing against the point that I never made. A classic example of this in dating is when men believe that, we're all women want the 666 standard. So, 6 inches, 6 figures, and over 6 feet in height. And I always say, if you just step outside into the wild, right, just observe for even 5 minutes the couples that you see, how many men meet those standards?
That sounds like incel math. I feel like we're going into incel math.
Incel math. I mean, did you know as well, actually, they actually made a female delusion calculator. So basically, they have a calculator where women can put in their preferences for men. So like their height, the salary they earn, and they will come back with a statistic in quotation marks about how delusional the woman is. And to think an incel actually went to all that trouble to make such a, it's just, yeah. Anyway.
What else is he going to do? He has a lot of free time on his hands. I'm realizing more and more that I need to put emphasis on the things that I actually care about. Like when I envision the relationship that I want to be in and that I'm going to be in, what are the actual values that come into play there? And then focusing on that while I'm going about dating, like holding that energy with me. So what I'm focusing on is the person trustworthy? Is he the kind of person that I can see myself having a lot of conversations with? Because basically that's somebody, if you're in a relationship, you're spending loads of time with that person. You're just having a lot of conversations with them. And do I feel safe with him? Does he take care of me? Is he a good communicator? And yes, do I like looking at his face? And do I feel like kissing him? And can I see myself sleeping with him? But really a six-pack, I don't think is that important. And I think, yeah, this kind of society where we focus too much on the superficial is also not healthy. But it is important and it is totally valid. And it is, we have to be attracted to the person that we're with. It can't be another way. We deserve that. Just like a caveat about the 666.
Yeah, agreed. And I will never say a woman shouldn't have that standard if she wants to, but it's clear that not every woman that has that standard or wants a perfect man in quotation marks. A lot of women just want a man who treats them well and they find physically attractive. Bearing in mind, finding a man physically attractive doesn't mean that he's conventionally attractive. They're not always the same thing. For example, like for me, Chris Hemsworth and The Rock are conventionally attractive men. I personally don't find them attractive, but that doesn't mean that they're not attractive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's not my thing, The Rock also. I mean, I do want the perfect man. I want the man who's perfect for me.
Yeah, well said. That's so sweet. So that's the straw man fallacy. So yeah, don't get sucked into that either, because it's quite a blatant misrepresentation of what women are actually saying. A lot of women aren't saying that they want to date, male models and, billionaires. I mean, they're not actually saying that at all.
Yeah, I guess like to tie it all together, and I now understand we didn't really address that directly in the former logical fallacy. Basically, as you said at the top of this one, if somebody does address you with this kind of fallacy, what you can do is directly address the fact that he's exaggerating or they are exaggerating what you actually said, right? Don't get sucked into, well, why can't I have a man who's da-da-da-da-da, but say, or like the way to solve this fallacy is to say, I actually didn't say those things. This is an exaggeration of some things and an omittance of other things that I said. So this is not, I don't know, a good faith argument, kind of, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and also if I try to tie that with the former one, you also said that if somebody is presenting two seemingly mutually exclusive options. The way to tackle that is to say, well, actually, it's not only two options, there are more options. There's like a variety of options that exist there, and not only these two mutually exclusive ones, right?
Exactly. It's sort of like they're all sort of interconnected, really, as well. Once you see one, you can't stop seeing them all.
Yeah, it's a really cool way to address, I think, this discussions, to look at the things that are unstated, how they make you tick, and then instead of ticking, addressing the gaps. That's really cool. I like that a lot.
Hey, on to the next one. So the most common one is the ad hominem. So when you attack the person instead of their argument. This is common in the dating world because, women who say that, women should have standards are often dismissed as bitter, single, fat, ugly, old, or whatever. And the simple response to this is that it doesn't actually insulting the person, it doesn't actually A, address their argument, and B, it doesn't change the truth of their argument as well. And we see this a lot sometimes when people who are single or, they're told, oh, for example, what would they know about being in a relationship? But it's like, well, I mean, to some degree, I'd say that might like hold some water. But at the same time, it's like there are plenty of people in committed relationships who give awful advice as well. In fact, some of the worst relationship advice I've been given has come from people in relationships.
That's quite funny. True and funny.
So it's quite a straightforward one, this one. So if they are attacking you as a person or your relationship status, it just goes to show that they don't have an argument against what you're saying. And again, you can just fall back to, my demographic or how I look or my relationship status. It doesn't change the truth of what I've said because it doesn't.
Interesting. Can you say more about that? I don't feel convinced yet.
In what way?
I don't know, like my mind goes to like a friend that I have that is now in a committed relationship, but like, I don't know, a few years ago she wasn't. And then when I was asking for relationship advice, I was always like kind of leaning towards getting the advice from our third friend who was in a relationship. But my friend who wasn't in a relationship back then is now in a healthy committed relationship. So does that make sense? Like she wasn't in a relationship at the time, but that doesn't mean that she couldn't be.
Yeah, I think this argument goes back to focusing on what the person is actually saying as opposed to them. And it sort of ties into the genetic fallacy where you dismiss what somebody's saying based on where they're coming from. You have to, like, the whole point in logical fallacies is to look at the merits of the actual argument made and then respond to that as opposed to what the person is about or where they're coming from or other matters.
Oh, I see what you mean. I think this, when I think about it now more deeply, it seems that this is the ultimate emotional trigger, right? Because if somebody dismisses you for you, it can be very offensive. And then it takes a lot of, I don't know, strength in holding yourself up to be like, okay, but that is besides the point. Please address my argument, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And that's not to say that, it isn't to say, I mean, I use the example of people who are single as an example. That doesn't mean to say people who are single always give good advice around dating and relationships. They absolutely don't. But the point was to focus on what they're saying as opposed to their relationship status or other factors.
Yeah, I mean, that is pretty hard, I think, in life because it's such a hard thing to navigate. And sometimes when you're seeking advice, it really does depend for you who you get it from. But I think we spoke about it in a past episode where it's like, if you're getting advice from different people, it's not like one is right and one is wrong, but like every piece of advice for me is like painted with the person who gave it to me. Kind of like if I'm reading a piece of news, I will also attach to that piece of information in my mind where I read it, if that makes sense. Because that paints the tone and that paints the values.
Mm-hmm, yes, definitely. But I think it is like normal and natural to look at what, where people are coming from. But ad hominem, and we'll get onto the genetic fallacy in a bit, but the ad hominem is specifically about attacking the person and not the argument. So just because you disagree with somebody, that doesn't mean that their person or who they are or their relationship status deserves to be attacked as a response to something unrelated that they've said.
Yeah, I understand what you mean now. If I think about it in like a bit shifted example, like let's say there's a discussion about finances and you're there and you're a financially successful person and somebody else is there who's not. You both may give a piece of advice. To dismiss the other person's piece of advice because he's not doing that well financially would be indeed intellectually lazy. because I can put that aside. Maybe he does have a good idea, or maybe not. But if I address the idea directly, then I'm actually, engaging in reasonable conversation and like a logical discussion.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. So yeah, that's the ad hominem fallacy. So on to the next one, the appeal to tradition. So we see this a lot in dating when people, you think back to the 1950s or the 1940s or prior to that, when their grandparents had such long-lasting, stable relationships that nobody ever left, and they were together for 70 years up until they both died, right? So this is an appeal to tradition, is when you argue for something because it's always been done that way, and that's just the way it is. And it's often used, again, quite prominently in the sex work argument. So when people say, well, sex work is the oldest profession, like, firstly, it's unlikely to be true. Secondly, it's the oldest form of exploitation, because I severely doubt that, prostitutes in the 1400s, were actually making any decent money if they were not controlled by a pimp. And thirdly, most importantly, just because something is old, that doesn't mean that it's a good thing. Case in point, slavery.
Oh my God.
Like, slavery's been around for centuries, probably since humans, began to walk the earth and started amassing resources. But that's not a reason to have slavery around, because it's always been there.
Damn, mic drop. That's a very good argument. Yeah, always been around is also very limited, because what do we know about history? It's just a glimpse.
Exactly. Especially when people think, like, I don't know. My mind, I do enjoy history, but anything prior to 1800 is just a bit too far back for my mind to fathom in terms of, what life could have been like. But yeah, there's still a lot about human history and human behavior that we just don't know because it was so long ago.
Literally, for the majority of the human race, we were hunter-gatherers. So.
And who said that women weren't doing majority of the hunting and the gathering? Who said that maybe men were maybe the caregivers who sat at home because they were the ones who could protect the offspring?
From the very little that I know, it's hypothesized, because literally, like, we don't know what happened there because there was no writing. That's why history starts at a certain point. But I think that there was just a big variety, like a lot of different social structures. And indeed, in some of them, like, women had a lot of power. I imagine some were matriarchal. Yeah. And that's literally the majority of our human race, and all of our biology and evolutionary psychology. All of that has evolved during that time. So, yeah.
Exactly. So appeal to tradition. Yeah, don't fall for it, because, again, just because something is old, that doesn't mean it's good. At the same time, it was, again, another example, it was the norm for children to be sent to work down the mines. Again, that's not a practice we condone nowadays, because we realize that that is not acceptable. And we still campaign to this day for child labor to end. So, yeah, the appeal to tradition.
Yeah, definitely. I think that could be an argument that is usually made on the favor of patriarchy, right? Like, because basically, what does it mean? Oh, once upon a time, women didn't used to divorce their husbands. Yeah, because they didn't have social status outside of their marriage.
Yeah, it wasn't an option to divorce. There's a reason why when divorce was legalized in America, the divorce rate shot up. When women could get their own money and have bank accounts and credit cards, the divorce rate shot up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it's a very weird way to make something legitimate, saying that it was the norm for a lot of years.
But as an aside, I think, was it maybe you or Lilith who pointed out that before women could get divorced, they would just kill their husbands? So when men want to remove, like, no-fault divorce, I wonder if the murder rate for men will just increase, because to get out of it, they just kill them, or they just murder them.
That sounds like, first of all, I'm flattered that you conflate between me and Lilith. I think that's a Lilith thing. That sounds like very on brand.
This isn't condoning murder, by the way. This is just, women, I guess, being desperate, get out of a bad marriage.
Exactly. Desperation is exactly the word that I was striving for. Of course, I don't think anybody should be killed. But in a situation where you're in a cage and you have no options, and if you think about women in, bad toxic relationships right now, they end up running to a shelter where they are alone just so they can be away from the person. So, of course, if you can't run away, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's sad. It's sad for both the person that needs to kill a man. The woman, is also sad for her.
There was actually a really big case in the UK about a woman who murdered her husband, and she either got pardoned or a very, very reduced sentence, because she was able to prove her sons, campaigned for her as well. but she was able to prove that there'd been a sustained amount of domestic and emotional and psychological abuse from her husband.
So it was self-defense.
It wasn't really self-defense because she wasn't in any physical danger.
It wasn't self-defense in the sense of he was about to shoot her with a gun to her head at that moment, but it was self-defense in the broader sense.
Exactly. It was like sustained abuse and coercive control. And she actually got a reduced sentence. So she was sentenced to manslaughter and she was eventually released from prison, I think in about 2019. It was a really big case. I'll link it in the show notes. And basically her two sons campaigned heavily in her favor because they knew the abuse that she'd suffered. And yeah, that was a mitigating factor in her sentencing and her release.
Yeah, I mean, it's awful for everybody. Not like a sane human being doesn't want to have to kill somebody. Yeah.
So men should be careful what they wish for if they want to get rid of no-fault divorce, because I wonder if that's and especially nowadays we've got more understanding of the role of domestic abuse, because back in way back when, people didn't have a concept of domestic abuse. Like, you could legally rape your wife and there'd be nothing wrong with it, right?
You wouldn't call it abuse. You would just call it domestic.
Exactly, just being married. Like, it's just part of being married. But now we've got a better understanding of especially complex abuse, like coercive control, where he may not be physically beating you, but that's still a severe form of abuse. So it may not work out well for them ultimately.
Yeah, if somebody tells you, why can't we just go back to the 20s and 30s where women didn't leave their husbands, just tell them, oh yeah, you know what the death rate was for men back then?
I need to find out what that is. I'm going to look into that because it'll be interesting to know. Stand at the foot of the bed. So the false equivalence. So treating two unequal things as if they are the same. So I will say on the record, I have no problems with men having standards for women. In fact, I think relationships and just dating, like, generally, unlike Patricia's friend, is better if everybody had standards and stuck to them. So nobody's settled for and people are happier. Men can have standards too. But a common false equivalence we see is if a woman says, for example, she wants to date a man who's 6'4", and a guy then says, oh, well, I've got a weight requirement. And I'm not saying men can't have a weight requirement, but the reason why these two aren't the same is that height is objective. So a 6'4" man will look the same whether he's in Portugal, Denmark, Nigeria, US, because, 6'4" is an objective measure. The thing with weight is that two people can weigh exactly the same and look very different.
Okay, but just to be nitty-gritty about it, the person can also say, I have like a BMI index, or he can just say it like very flatly, as my brother says, like, I don't like women who are a little fat. Or he would say, like, she wasn't pretty enough.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'm not saying they can't, but I'm just saying that the actual standard doesn't make sense because, height is objective, but weight it presents differently on different people. Somebody who's got a 32 BMI, they might look very different to another person who looks a 32 BMI. And from my experience, men are really, really bad at estimating women's weight. They're very bad. But yeah, so the standards aren't really, and, a woman can just lie about their weight and they're likely, obviously, if a woman is, say, 600 pounds, if she tries to say I'm 120, then no. But you can just lie. It's easier to lie about weight than it is to lie about your height because, I don't know. But that's a very superficial example.
But just so you know, on a dating app, if you see a person, if you see a man's height, always subtract 5 centimeters. Or 2 inches.
That's what people have said. I mean, for me, I do prefer taller men, but my general thing is, as long as I can't see like the middle of his head, like the top of his head, he's fine. Like, I'm not really like, he has to be over 6 feet. Like, and again, it also depends a lot on his build, on the way he carries himself.
It depends a lot on the build, a lot. Because a lot of the times the short guys, not just that they're short, they're just small. That's like a little bit unattractive to me. But I want to dive deeper into this false argument that you're saying, because what are you actually trying to say? Because in the show notes, you gave a different example. You're saying women reject short men, so men rejecting single mothers is the same thing. Like, can you explain more? What's the fallacy here? Why is it wrong? And what should we do about it?
I don't think it's wrong. I just think the standards are not really equal, in the sense that, like, having a standard for single mums is very different to having a physical requirement. Like I say, I think it's a false equivalence, generally, because I don't think any woman is saying that men have to date women who are fat or they have to date women who are single mums. I mean, I've got my qualms with the body positivity movement generally, but what it's really about is to still treat people that you don't want to date with respect, and men struggle to do that. I mean, to be honest, single mothers are demonized, but they're not inherently bad people. And sometimes people can become a single mother through no fault of their own. Like my mum is a single mother because her husband died. Like that wasn't her fault.
Yeah. I don't know, why are single moms demonized? I think it's more that men prefer not to date single moms because they want to procreate and have, it's like a thing.
But single dads don't get the same energy. And a lot of single dads will deliberately go for women without children so they can basically get a free babysitter. And the energy isn't equal. And again, I'm not saying a man has to date a single mum, but it's also about that respect. Just because you wouldn't date somebody, that doesn't mean that you demonize them as a whole group. Like, I'm not physically attracted to short men, but I wouldn't be like all short men are ugly or that they don't deserve love.
Yeah, because people have merit besides their sexual attractiveness. Like in the context of dating, you want to be with people who are sexually attractive to you. But outside of the context of dating, which is life, a lot of people exist. And they don't all have to be sexually attractive to you to get respect.
Exactly. And, me saying, like, I don't find short men attractive isn't me saying that all short men are ugly or that they're unattractive or don't deserve love or anything, or that I think we're at the bottom of the pole.
Or that if you have a short colleague, a male short colleague, and he presents a presentation, that you will be disrespectful to his presentation or something. That's like besides the point.
Exactly. A lot of men counter and say women can control their weight, which is true. But then I always like to counter, I'm being a bit facetious here, but I always say, well, men can also control how much money they make. So you can't really then complain if a woman wants a man with more money because you can control that. It's not easy to control, just like it's not always easy for a woman to control her weight, but
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so that is part 1 of the logical fallacies. We will do the logical fallacies 6 to 10 in the next episode. But yeah, let us know what you think so far. If you've come across any of these logical fallacies, if you have any better examples, a way to counter them. But yeah, let us know. And we will see you next week.
Yeah, let's continue the conversation. Yeah.
Bye, Queens.